What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing which team will finish in last place in the AFC North. We're going to be talking about Kirk Cousins' future with the Minnesota Vikings. Are Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets destined to implode this year? And ACC Expansion chaos, man. It's crazy what's going on with conference realignment right now. We saw what the Big Ten just did to the Pac-12. There were a lot of schools that departed from the Pac-12 to join the Big 12 or the Big Ten. And maybe the ACC could be next. We're going to be talking about all those things. But first, if you haven't already, make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel. We go live every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Listen to the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms. We're not just available on YouTube. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon. Wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the JT Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us with a 5-star review. We will greatly appreciate it. All you got to do is go to whichever podcasting platform that you use, type in the JT Sports Podcast, and it will pop up. Or you can go down to the description down below, scroll down a little bit, and there will be the links to the Apple and Spotify versions of the podcast. The AFC North is going to be one of the toughest divisions in the NFL this year. You have the Ravens, the Bengals, who pretty much are Super Bowl contenders, and then you got the Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are good enough to be playoff teams. And with this division being so talented, who's going to come in last place? Now, there are a good amount of people out there, including Vegas, who think that the Steelers are going to finish in last place. And here's the thing about Pittsburgh finishing in last place, right? Even though they may not have the most talented roster in this division, this roster isn't bad. This is a really talented roster. As a matter of fact, some may argue that this is the most talented team that Mike Tomlin has had in Pittsburgh and over the last 3 to 4 years. You look at the Cleveland Browns, they have one of the better rosters, not just in this division, but in the whole entire NFL. Really good offensive line. You're pretty much expecting Deshaun Watson to bounce back. Your secondary should be really good. But how improved is your run defense going to be is the biggest question for Cleveland. Baltimore, as long as Lamar Jackson can stay healthy, I think they're going to be pretty competitive. And you got Cincinnati up there, who won this division last season. But when it comes to picking who's going to finish in last place in the AFC North, do you really think that team's going to be the Steelers, who has Mike Tomlin still as their head coach, who's yet to have a losing season, despite having several years in the NFL where there were some expectations that Pittsburgh could have their first losing seasons? How many times over the last 4 years has Pittsburgh been picked to be the worst team in this division? Are you really that confident that the Steelers are going to be finishing in last place this year? Do you not trust Mike Tomlin? Do you not think that Kenny Pickett is going to improve in year 2 after the glimpses that he had of brilliance, especially in the fourth quarter of games with all of the fourth quarter comebacks that he led Pittsburgh to? You look at the Cleveland Browns, they have a history of being dysfunctional. And how much do you trust Kevin Stefanski? Do you trust Kevin Stefanski more than you trust Mike Tomlin? What has Kevin Stefanski shown you over the last couple of years that gives you confidence that the Cleveland Browns are going to finish above Pittsburgh if you think that Pittsburgh is going to finish in last place? And I think that the last time the Steelers finished below the Browns in this division was like decades ago. There's a level of consistency that you get out of the Pittsburgh Steelers that you don't get out of the Cleveland Browns. And yes, you can have concerns and questions about Kenny Pickett, but outside of him, this is a really good roster. And Kenny Pickett, the stats don't show how much improvement he made over the course of his rookie season. I'm looking at the Cleveland Browns. What was their biggest struggle last year? their inability to stop the run. And they're in a division where the other three teams that they face off against twice this season all are really good running the football. Pittsburgh can run the football with Najee Harris. The Baltimore Ravens have Lamar Jackson and an incredible group of running backs. Cincinnati has Joe Mixon and an improved offensive line. And if you can't stop the run in this division, how much success can you possibly have? Some of the best rushing teams in the NFL reside in the AFC North. When you look at the Cleveland Browns, can you really say that you have faith that they're going to be able to live up to the level of talent that they have on their roster after years of disappointing performances, after years of not being that great? And then they get Deshaun Watson, that just changes everything. You know, what about the Ravens, though? If they have an injury or two to Lamar Jackson, OBJ, where would they lie in this division? You know, like, I don't think that Pittsburgh is just going to be locked in to be the worst team in this division. You got consistency with Mike Tomlin being your head coach. You know that with Mike Tomlin being your head man, you're at least going to have 9 wins. 9-8 in any other division probably would be a second place finish. Maybe 9-8 gets you last in the AFC North, but is it really that bad? Who's more likely to have a losing record, the Cleveland Browns or the Pittsburgh Steelers? I probably would go with the Cleveland Browns. I don't really trust Kevin Stefanski. This is an organization that has a consistent history of not being able to perform up to expectation. And although they have a really talented roster, talent doesn't automatically win you games. You got to have the coaching and you got to have the proper infrastructure in place. I'm looking at Pittsburgh. You got stability with Mike Tomlin. You got a great defense. You got the ability to run the football. And you have a promising young quarterback in Kenny Pickett. Like I said, stop looking at statistics from last year. You got to stop judging players based on the box score and judge players based on what the film tells you. And what the film shows about Kenny Pickett is that he may not have had impressive starts to the game, but as we already know, the old-fashioned mantra is not about how you start, it's about how you finish. And how did Kenny Pickett finish against the Las Vegas Raiders? He led them to a comeback from behind victory. And what many people fail to say about Pittsburgh is that if Kenny Pickett would have started week 1 last season, they probably would have made it to the postseason. You remember that game against the Carolina Panthers when the Steelers didn't have Kenny Pickett? He was out with a concussion, and Mitch Trubisky came in, and the Steelers were moving the ball downfield, but Kenny Pickett had too many red zone interceptions. You see, it's easy to look at Pittsburgh and circle this as being the worst team to finish in the AFC North this year. But I think that that's just too easy of an answer. I don't think that enough people are really considering the problems that the Cleveland Browns have. The Steelers improved their offensive line. They're calling this the picket fence. You have Kenny Pickett, who has shown a lot of promise over the course of this offseason, and you have a stable, functional organization. The Browns are still dysfunctional. They still have concerns when it comes to the interior of their defensive line. They got a really good offensive line. Their receiving core, although unproven, is really talented. But I probably would pick them to finish last in the AFC North before I picked the Pittsburgh Steelers. And before you call me biased, I didn't pick Pittsburgh to make it to the playoffs last year or even the year before. And I think that most people will agree that I go about this channel in the most unbiased way possible. If I thought that Pittsburgh was going to finish last in this division, I promise you I would have no problem saying it. I'm somebody who, yes, I am a fan of the Steelers, but I don't let my fandom cloud my expectations for the season. I keep it real, and I keep it unbiased. And I'm looking at the Cleveland Browns. I don't really know if Deshaun Watson is a great fit in Kevin Stefanski's system. And I don't even know if their run defense is going to be all that improved, even though they did bring in Jim Schwartz, and they paid a lot of money in free agency to Dalvin Tomlinson. You also brought in Maurice Hurst. But I still don't know if that's enough to completely revamp that run defense. And their linebacking core isn't good outside of JOK. I'm not a big believer in the Cleveland Browns. And I know that you can't define the team based on their history. But you can define the team based on what they've done recently over the last couple of years. And what has Cleveland done over the last couple of years outside of making it to the postseason that 1 year? They haven't really done anything. Last year, people thought this was going to be a team that could be a playoff contender. And what did they do? They disappointed. Although Deshaun Watson was suspended, when he came back, he wasn't anything to write home about. He was really rusty. And I do think that people have to right to be skeptical of Deshaun Watson being able to bounce back. We don't even know if Deshaun Watson is going to be the same player that he was with the Houston Texans. They paid him all this money just for him to go out and perform how he did last season. You can't use, like he was a little rusty. Like, you started him over Jacoby Brissett. Some may argue that Jacoby Brissett would have given the Browns a better chance at making it to the postseason last year than Deshaun Watson, who obviously was showing signs of field rust with his performance. He was struggling to read defenses. He was struggling with accuracy. He didn't look anywhere close to the player that he was playing for the Houston Texans. I have more confidence in Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers this year than I do Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns. You see, coaching matters in the NFL. The teams that have good rosters with good coaching normally are the teams that have the most success versus teams that have good rosters but decent coaching. Remember the Dallas Cowboys all those years when they were going 8-8 with the master clapper that is Jason Garrett? I think the Cleveland Browns kind of are in that same category with Kevin Stefanski. I don't think he's a bad coach, but in a division like the AFC North, where you have great quarterbacks and great head coaches, I think the Cleveland Browns are the odd man out. They got a pretty good team, but they don't have a pretty good coach. You can blame Baker Mayfield all you want to for the Cleveland Browns not being able to get it done before they had Deshaun. But this was the same team that went to the playoffs with Baker Mayfield when everybody was on the Baker Mayfield hype train. And it's crazy how things have just shifted since then. And now, once again, we're back hyping up the Cleveland Browns and trying to downplay the Pittsburgh Steelers like Mike Tomlin hasn't been able to overachieve over the last 3-4 years. You see, what's funny about the people who doubt Pittsburgh is that they talk about, this team isn't great. Mike Tomlin's going to have his first losing season. But once Pittsburgh ends up overexceeding expectations like they have done over the last 3-4 years, nobody's ever there to be found. It's always praise for Mike Tomlin, but nobody actually comes out and admits when they were wrong about Pittsburgh. It's easy to pick Pittsburgh to finish last in this division because the Ravens, the Bengals, and the Browns, they're more flashy. Pittsburgh doesn't really have a lot of flash. Outside of George Pickens and Deontay Johnson, there aren't a lot of players that really are going to wow you. You got players who are consistent, who come in and get the job done. And Pittsburgh has one of the most talented defenses in the whole entire NFL. You got TJ Watt. You saw how different this team performed when TJ Watt came back and he was fully healthy. You got Alex Highsmith, who's coming off a career-high 14 sacks. Cleveland, they struggled with their pass rush last year. Yes, they did trade for Zadarius Smith, but is Zadarius Smith and Myles Garrett a better pass rushing duo than Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt? What about the Ravens? I mean, they lack pass rush. The only team in this division that really doesn't have too many concerns are the Pittsburgh Steelers. Outside of Kenny Pickett, what else is the biggest concern coming out of Pittsburgh? The cornerback position has improved. You look at what they have at linebacker now. Your defensive line is still amongst the best in the NFL. Meanwhile, the Ravens have concerns with their pass rush. You don't really know if everything's going to work out with this offense, even though I do have belief in it. But A lot of people don't know how Lamar Jackson and Todd Monken are going to work. The Cincinnati Bengals, they are a team that historically gets off to a slow start with Joe Burrow at the helm at QB. And if they get into a slow start this season, you wonder if that kind of could hold them back in this division. I'm not saying the Pittsburgh Steelers can't finish in last place this year, but I am saying that I probably would bet money that Pittsburgh finishes in third place or higher. I don't know who's going to finish in last in the AFC North, but I definitely feel it's not going to be Pittsburgh. I probably would put my money on the Browns finishing in last place in the division. I don't know if Kevin Stefanski is as good as a head coach as Zach Taylor, Mike Tomlin, or even John Harbaugh. I don't even know if Deshaun Watson is a great fit in his system. And we don't even know if Deshaun is even remotely the same player now that he was a couple of years ago before all the off-the-field incidents. Who will finish last in the AFC North? My guess probably are the Cleveland Browns. Kirk Cousins is going to be a free agent after the end of this upcoming NFL season. And when the owner of the Minnesota Vikings was asked about Kirk Cousins' future and where they were at in terms of him getting a new contract, he didn't really have too much to say. He kind of said it's on the general manager and head coach Kevin Stefanski to decide what Kirk Cousins' future is with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Kirk is 34 years old. He's had a lot of success with the Minnesota Vikings ever since he signed with them back in 2018. But you got to ask yourself, what has Kirk Cousins done in the postseason? Is Kirk Cousins the guy who can lead the Minnesota Vikings over the top? I love Kirk Cousins, and I love him even more after watching him on the Netflix quarterback documentary. But watching that Netflix documentary made me realize something. Some quarterbacks, i.e. Patrick Mahomes, are just that guy. Meanwhile, you have guys like Kirk Cousins who they put in all the work, they try as hard as possible to improve their game, and they perform at a really high level, but in big moments and big games, they just can't get it done. Doesn't mean they're a terrible player, doesn't mean they're not good. It just means that in high pressure moments, they don't come through more times than not. And for the Minnesota Vikings, you have a pretty good team. Your defense is a little bit of a question mark, but overall, when you think about the outlook of the Minnesota Vikings for the foreseeable future, with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and a pretty solid offensive line, you should be able to compete for a Super Bowl depending on if you land the right quarterback. You see, the problem with Kirk Cousins is that he's good enough to get you there. He's not good enough to get you over the hump. You see, in the NFL, we have this narrative that every quarterback can win a Super Bowl, which may seem true when we think about guys who've won Super Bowls in the past who weren't considered to be elite. Joe Flacco comes to mind. Even Jimmy Garoppolo, although he came short in the Super Bowl with the 49ers a couple of years back, he still was good enough to get them there. But when you have a Patrick Mahomes, or you have a Justin Herbert, or Joe Burrow, or Josh Allen, it gives you a better chance at being able to get to the big game because those players can make the biggest plays in the biggest moments of the game. And Kirk Cousins, way too often, with the Minnesota Vikings, in big moments, he's came up small. You remember against the New York Giants when they lost to Daniel Jones, fam, in the wild card round? I won't forget that. I will never forget. It's 4th and long, game on the line. Minnesota is trying to keep their season alive. And what does Kirk Cousins do? Instead of just saying, F it, game on the line, we need to do whatever we can to keep this game alive, I'm just going to throw it deep and give Justin Jefferson, the best receiver in the NFL, a chance to make a play. But instead of doing that, Kirk Cousins says, nah, I'm going to check it down 4 yards to TJ Hawkinson, who was nowhere close to getting the first down. You got to ask yourself if you're a Vikings fan. Kirk Cousins, good quarterback, but can you do better? There's an old saying that goes, if you can do better, do better. And with the quarterback options that are going to be available next year, there aren't really a lot that really give you a lot of optimism and say, oh yeah, like they can be better than Kirk Cousins. But I do think when you look at all of the upcoming young quarterbacks that we have potentially in the 2024 NFL draft, there's going to be a lot of them. You could get a Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Quinn Ewers, Joe Milton without having to give up a fortune to trade up into the top 5 to get one of them. I'm looking at Kirk Cousins, and he's not a bad quarterback, but I don't think he's good enough to get you over the hump. And he's proven that time in and time out. So when it comes to his future in Minnesota, I don't know if he's going to end up coming back. I doubt he comes back to Minnesota. Minnesota probably could do a lot worse than Kirk Cousins. He is a top 12, top 13 quarterback in the game, but in today's NFL, you got to have a great quarterback if you want to increase your chances of being able to win a Super Bowl. If you want to maximize your championship opportunity, you got to find somebody who can get it done in those crucial moments. Justin Herbert, he's been able to come through on plenty of occasions for the LA Chargers. Yeah, that wild card loss was really ugly, and we do have to give him some blame for that. Elite quarterbacks step up in the biggest moments. Kirk Cousins had some big moments last season, like that comeback against the Indianapolis Colts. But what happened in the playoffs when the game was on the line and they needed Captain Kirk to step up and elevate this team? He wasn't able to do it. Maybe Kyler Murray could be an upgrade from Kirk Cousins. Now, you would have to work out, something with the contract, but I think that you could get Kyler Murray with only having to give up a first-round pick. And Kyler Murray is a really good quarterback. I don't think he's washed. Prior to last season, he was a top 10 quarterback coming off several Pro Bowl seasons. People make it seem like Kyler Murray is a bust. Kyler Murray is one of the best quarterbacks in the league when he's healthy. And even though he's coming off a devastating ACL injury, he probably won't have the same athleticism now that he did post-injury or pre-injury. I still think with an offensive mind that's talented as Kevin Stefanski, he'll be able to have Kyler Murray playing at a really high level. And Kyler Murray, when he's at his best, he's better than Kirk Cousins. And plus, he brings more to the table. Mobility, the ability to extend plays, buy time for receivers to get open. These are all things that Kirk Cousins simply doesn't have. Kirk Cousins, really good quarterback, really great person on and off the field. This is somebody that you'd love to have in your locker room because he's all business, no nonsense. This dude literally lets his wife pick his clothes because he rather use that time to dedicate towards studying film and honing his game. He has A1 work ethic, but watching the Netflix quarterback documentary made me realize that you can put in all the work and still not be anywhere close to as good as what Patrick Mahomes is. Some things are just a gift by God. Patrick Mahomes, the ability that he has is rare. It's a blessing. Yes, he did work hard to get to the point that he is right now, but some of that talent he was just born with. Kirk Cousins isn't as talented as a Patrick Mahomes. And when you look at the AFC right now, the teams that are going the furthest have the best quarterbacks. The teams that go the furthest in the postseason have good quarterbacks. The teams that come up short in the Super Bowl over the last couple of years had worse quarterback play than the team that they lost to. Outside of, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, because both of those quarterbacks were fantastic in that game. Jalen Hurts is on his way to becoming a top 3 quarterback potentially this year, and Mahomes is the best in the game. Arguably the greatest quarterback of this generation right now. But you look at the NFC, and if you're Minnesota, you're looking at all these other teams who have quarterbacks around the same skill range as Kirk Cousins, like Geno Smith with the Seahawks and Jared Goff with the Detroit Lions. And you got an opportunity to get ahead of those teams by elevating the talent that you have at quarterback. I.e., you draft a rookie, or you end up trading for Kyler Murray. Now, if you want to let Kirk Cousins go because you want to have more money to allocate to the salary cap, so you can give Justin Jefferson the contract that he deserves, being the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. Understandable. You could bring in a rookie quarterback. Having a rookie quarterback that's good offers you a lot of flexibility because you got more money to spend at other positions to build up your team. And the Minnesota Vikings do a pretty good job at drafting and developing talent. So I trust them to be able to draft the right quarterback. I'm looking at Kirk Cousins. He's not bad. He can continue to get you to the playoffs. He can win you a couple more division titles. He's only 34 years old. We see guys like Brady, Rodgers playing into their 40s. Kirk Cousins still has 8-7 years left in the tank of pretty good football, but I don't know if he has any years of high quality football where he can get you over the hump, when he can outdo a Jalen Hurts or outdo a Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow in the Super Bowl. You see, the league has changed, people. It's changed. Look how oversaturated the quarterback market is right now. People consider Justin Fields to be a bust. Thinking about the season he had last year, a decade ago, people would view Justin Fields as a top 15 quarterback. It's crazy how saturated the quarterback position has become in the NFL. And the teams that are advancing the furthest are the teams that get the better play out of their QBs, who are able to get their quarterbacks to step up in big moments. Look at Trevor Lawrence. He threw 4 interceptions to start out that game against the Chargers. Came out in the second half and halftime, and he came back with 4 touchdowns. You see, that's what you're looking for in the franchise quarterback, a guy who can overcome adversity in the postseason. Kirk Cousins, I don't think he handles adversity all that well. He tends to be a guy who kind of starts to second guess himself. He can be indecisive at times, and he can kind of lack confidence in himself. These are not the kinds of things that equate to a quarterback that can get you over the top. When Jalen Hurts threw that interception in the Super Bowl, or he had that fumble that got scooped up by Nick Bolton, I forgot if it was an interception or a fumble, but all I remember is that Jalen Hurts did something, and Nick Bolton scooped it up and turned it to the house for 6. Following drive, you know what Jalen Hurts did? He came back on the field and led Philadelphia on a touchdown drive. That's what you want to see out of your quarterback. You want to see resiliency. You want to see toughness. You want to see grit. And I'm not saying that Kirk Cousins lacks these things, but I'm saying in comparison to Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, Joe Burrow, he doesn't have it enough to get you to the top. And that's why I kind of think that the Minnesota Vikings have been non-committal to Kirk Cousins long-term in terms of giving him an extension. Like, look, the Dallas Cowboys, for example, are already working on getting a new contract for Dak Prescott. When a team wants you and they know you're the guy, they have no reluctancy to extend you. There's no, we'll have to see about it. It's up to the GM and the head coach. Like, when the team likes you and they believe in you, they get your deal done ASAP. With Kirk Cousins, though, the Minnesota Vikings front office is okay with allowing this to be settled in March, which is around the time free agency begins. And the fact that the Minnesota Vikings aren't really planning on doing anything with Kirk Cousins and coming to the table with them on a new extension until March kind of shows you what they feel about Kirk Cousins. If he was our priority and they viewed him in a high regard, not saying they review him in a low regard, but if they really believed in Kirk Cousins being able to be their franchise quarterback after this season long term, I felt he would have already been extended. Look how fast other quarterbacks have gotten extensions. Dak Prescott is getting paid a lot of money, and they're about to give him another re-up on his contract because they believe in him. They think he's the guy. When a team believes in you, they don't hesitate to extend you. There's a lot of hesitation with Kirk Cousins. I've never seen an owner that says, we don't know when it comes to the future of the current guy we have at QB, if they believe in him. When you have a owner that believes in the quarterback, they come out and they publicly show their support for him, and they say, yeah, we're going to get a deal done. Did the Cincinnati Bengals and the LA Chargers say, that's up to the head coaches and the GM to decide what their futures are going to be? No. They said, we're going to get a deal done with those guys because these are our quarterbacks. Same thing with Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia. Some people may say that the Philadelphia Eagles gave Jalen Hurts the bag way too soon. After one great season, some may say that they might have had to see Jalen Hurts perform at a higher level for at least another season before they would have dished out that hefty salary that they gave him. You want to know why they rushed to give Jalen Hurts an extension? Because they believe in him. Even the Ravens believe in Lamar. And he's had injury concerns over the last 2 years. He's missed the second half of the season for 2 straight years in a row, and yet they still extended him. You want to know why? Because they believe in him. They believe that he's the guy. But Kirk Cousins, it doesn't seem like there's the same amount of belief for him that other organizations have for their franchise quarterbacks. Like I said, Kirk Cousins is not a bad quarterback. He's a really good quarterback. But with the way the NFL is going now, good may not be good enough. Instead of good, you may need great. What was Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes? Great. Matthew Stafford and Joe Burrow, what were they that year? Great. You need great quarterback play if you want to be able to be a championship football team in today's NFL. I'm looking at Matthew Stafford. There's a reason why the Rams felt like he was an upgrade over Jared Goff, who took them to a Super Bowl not too long before that. That tells you everything you need to know about the current state of the quarterback market in the NFL. These coaches aren't okay with just good. They're looking for great. Geno Smith has the potential to be great with what's around him. Kirk Cousins has a really talented offense, and he puts up fantastic numbers in the regular season. But in the postseason, when it matters the most and where legends are made, this is where Kirk Cousins comes up small. Legends are made in the postseason. How people remember you is what you do in the playoffs. That's why these narratives about Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, and Lamar Jackson get thrown around a lot, because they haven't had a lot of success in the postseason. But the guys who have had success in the postseason, it's altered their careers. Think about Joe Flacco. Nobody really felt Joe Flacco was a great quarterback until he led the Ravens to the Super Bowl, and now a lot of people hold him in high regard. Think about Tom Brady. Before he even won his first Super Bowl with New England, he was an afterthought. You see, Eli Manning was never viewed as a great regular season quarterback. He's probably only been a top 10 quarterback, twice throughout his NFL career. But what separated Eli Manning from the other quarterbacks? What made Eli Manning so great? His ability to rise in the biggest moments in the postseason. You know, when the playoffs come, you're going to get a different Eli. You're going to get playoff Eli. The Eli Manning that you got in the postseason was never the same one that you got during the regular season. Eli was able to elevate his game in the postseason. Same thing with Joe Flacco. The best quarterbacks are able to elevate their game, not just in the playoffs, but in the regular season also. They're more consistent with it. You look at Kirk Cousins, when has he ever elevated his play in the postseason? He got outplayed by Daniel Jones. Let's just keep it 100. Let's just state some facts here. Did Daniel Jones outplay Kirk Cousins? Yes or no? I think we can all agree with an emphatic yes. And Kirk Cousins was getting outplayed by a quarterback who had way less to work with than what he did. His best weapon was Isaiah Hodgins outside of Saquon. Isaiah Hodgins, fam, who was on the practice squad a couple of weeks before that. And Daniel Jones was out there cooking. Meanwhile, Kirk Cousins was kind of getting in his head, being indecisive. And we saw that with the final play of the Minnesota Vikings season last year with that check down on 4th and long to TJ Hawkinson. You see, Kirk Cousins is a really good QB. He can get you there, but he's not a quarterback that's going to elevate you over the top. I think that this probably is Kirk Cousins' final season with the Minnesota Vikings. If you're Kevin O'Connell, you look at Kirk Cousins, you shake his hand, you say, we appreciate everything that you've done for this franchise, this organization, and this community, but we're going to go in a different direction. Now, rather if it plays off or not, That's all on Kevin Stefanski and the organization. Kevin Stefanski is an offensive-minded coach, so you trust him to be able to develop his own quarterback. You trust him if you were to trade for a Kyler Murray. It's not going to take that much to give up to get Kyler Murray. And plus, I'm pretty sure Arizona wants to move on from that contract. So they're not going to be asking for multiple first-round picks for Kyler Murray. They will be okay with one first-rounder for Kyler Murray. I don't think Kirk Cousins is going to be a Viking for the next couple of seasons. I think that this probably will be his final season with Minnesota. He's not a bad quarterback. I think he's a pretty good quarterback, but that's the problem with Kirk Cousins. Pretty good in today's NFL. Where is it getting you? Nowhere close to a Lombardi trophy. You saw what happened to the 49ers against the Kansas City Chiefs. You saw Jimmy Garoppolo overthrow Emmanuel Sanders in the most important play of the game. Patrick Mahomes got outplayed by Jimmy Garoppolo in that Super Bowl for the first 4 quarters and a couple of minutes until he woke up the last 8 minutes and went crazy. That's what separates the greats from the average quarterbacks. If you want to know the difference between an elite quarterback and an okay quarterback, watch the Quarterback Netflix documentary. We see it with Kirk Cousins. Prime example. Patrick Mahomes rose to the occasion in the postseason despite having a nasty ankle injury. What did Kirk Cousins do in the big moment? He shrunk. I don't think Kirk Cousins is the future at quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, and I don't really think they feel so either. I think there's a reason why Kirk Cousins hasn't been extended yet. All these teams haven't hesitated to extend their franchise quarterbacks. Like, look at the New York Giants with Daniel Jones, dog. Daniel Jones got an extension quick after only one good season. You could have used the same argument for him, saying that it was too early to give Daniel Jones an extension after one good season. He had to prove it again. You want to know why the New York Giants paid Daniel Jones despite only 1 year proven success? Because they believe in him as the franchise quarterback. They believe he's the guy. If Minnesota felt Kirk was the guy, I'm pretty sure they would have redid his deal. He would have already been re-signed for another 3-4 years. But the fact that they're willing to negotiate with him after the season in March with free agency around the corner at that time, that kind of shows how Minnesota feels about Kirk Cousins. He's not really a priority right now. They're probably more focused on getting Justin Jefferson locked up for long term than y'all are worried about Kirk Cousins at the moment. And that also gives them time to evaluate, how the quarterback market is going to shape up. But I don't think Kirk Cousins is going to be a Minnesota Viking for too much longer, especially after this season. Before we move on, if you haven't already, make sure that you leave a like, subscribe to the channel. We go live every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Leave us a 5-star review. You can find the audio version of the JT Sports Podcast on all podcasting platforms. Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the JT Sports Podcast. All right. Aaron Rodgers, ever since he went to the New York Jets, has been the talk of the NFL media. Every single day it's, how good are the Jets going to be with Aaron Rodgers? Or the New York Jets Super Bowl or bust with Aaron Rodgers being their starting quarterback this year. And everybody seems to have really lofty goals and expectations for the Jets this season. But there are a good amount of people out there who tell you that this thing is going to end really ugly and it's not going to have the Cinderella ending that many people think that it will. And, when you look at the New York Jets this season, they do have a really good roster. They got a great defense, Sauce Gardner. You also have Quentin Williams. You got some young pass rushers that have a lot of potential. And then you look at the offense. You look at receiver. You got Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard. You got a really good group of running backs. You got Aaron Rodgers back there at QB. But people have concerns about the offensive line. And for the people who do question the Jets' offensive line, you got a pretty good point. The teams that go the furthest in the playoffs are the teams that have really good offensive line play. Look at the last 4 teams that were in conference championship week last year. Kansas City, Cincinnati. Who advanced in that matchup? Kansas City. You want to know why? Because they have a better offensive line than Joe Burrow. What has held back Joe Burrow and Cincinnati from capturing a Super Bowl? Their offensive line. Look at the NFC Championship. You had the Eagles and the 49ers who had two of the best offensive lines in that conference last year. If you don't have good offensive line play, you're not going to go too far. Now, in the Jets' case, I don't think that the Jets' offensive line is going to be bad enough that it holds them back from making it to the postseason. I think that the New York Jets, for them to implode, you got to say that Nathaniel Hackett and Aaron Rodgers is not going to work. You see the difference between the Aaron Rodgers and New York Jets saga versus Brett Favre and his tenure with the New York Jets is that Brett Favre was going into a situation where he didn't have any familiarity. New offensive coordinator, learning a new system with new teammates. Aaron Rodgers has a lot of familiarity. He's really comfortable being with the New York Jets. You want to know why? Because he has Nathaniel Hackett, somebody who he has a really good relationship with and somebody who he already understands his offense, what he wants, what he expects. Peyton Manning had a similar thing. Same thing with Tom Brady, although they didn't have the same offense per se that they did with their previous stop. Their coaching staffs were willing to tailor their offense a little bit to their liking and kind of implement some things that they were comfortable with their previous team. I think that the New York Jets hiring Nathaniel Hackett was a really good move if they were going after Aaron Rodgers, because not just do you entice Aaron Rodgers getting the offensive coordinator that he has a really good relationship with, but also getting somebody who he has a good understanding of what he expects out of his quarterback. Nathaniel Hackett and Aaron Rodgers already spent time together with each other in Green Bay. So with them already having that understanding and already having a good grasp on what each other is capable of, I don't really think there's going to be a lot of, inconsistency to start the season like it was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had to start running plays that Tom Brady was familiar with when he was playing with the New England Patriots. And we saw Tom Brady end up winning a Super Bowl his first season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think that this New York Jets saga has way more similarities to Tom Brady's stint with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers than it does Brett Favre when he was with the New York Jets. Aaron Rodgers was pretty much allowed to handpick the receivers that he wanted to throw the football to. This man took a $30-something million pay cut to help out this franchise. That shows commitment. That shows dedication to winning a Super Bowl. That's what you need if you want to be able to be a champion. You got to make sacrifices. And Aaron Rodgers took a $30-something million sacrifice for the sake of winning with the New York Jets. I think that many people keep going off the narrative that Aaron Rodgers just isn't a great person to have in the locker room with a young team. He's already proven that narrative wrong. Look how these players have embraced Aaron Rodgers in Hard Knocks. All you hear them talking about is, man, look how great 8 looks, man. 8 is the man. Oh, the bad man, number 8. These young players love Aaron Rodgers. He's like the cool hippie uncle that you have at the cookout. He may be a little bit weird, but he's a super cool, super likable guy. You see, I think the media keeps pushing a untrue narrative about Aaron Rodgers that when things go wrong, Aaron Rodgers is a bad teammate. They think that Aaron Rodgers is in the honeymoon state with the New York Jets, which the honeymoon state is pretty much, everybody likes each other, everybody's getting along, but after, things start to get a little bit tough, the honeymoon stage kind of starts to pass over. And that's where you start to see somebody's true personality. But I really think this is who Aaron Rodgers is. I just think that he didn't really care too much about the Green Bay Packers after they decided to draft Jordan Love instead of trying to get him additional help in order to win. I think that Aaron Rodgers kind of stopped caring a lot about the Packers organization when he realized that this was an organization that was more committed to the Packers than they were committed to winning with him. And you see with the New York Jets, they're all about Aaron Rodgers. And you kind of have to be all in when you have a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady on your team that's had a really great career and is a future Hall of Famer. Especially when they're in the tail end of their career, they need all the talent they can get. For the New York Jets, everything that the Green Bay Packers refused to do for Aaron Rodgers, they've done for Aaron Rodgers. And you can say their owner is impulsive. They don't have a history of being a stable franchise. But guys like Aaron Rodgers are good enough to come in and change the culture. That's what Tom Brady did with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He changed the culture. What were the Buccaneers before Tom Brady arrived? Like, you didn't hear anything about Tampa Bay since they won the Super Bowl back in 2002. Tom Brady gets there, and they win their first Super Bowl since, nearly 2 decades. Tom Brady changed the culture of the Buccaneers franchise when he was there. You see, just because the New York Jets were dysfunctional before Aaron Rodgers arrived doesn't mean they're still going to remain a dysfunctional franchise. Aaron Rodgers is the kind of quarterback that's good enough to change the culture of the New York Jets organization, at least while he's playing. I don't think that this Jets thing is going to result in a massive implosion. I don't think that the Jets are going to disappoint. I think that Aaron Rodgers is going to be good enough to get the New York Jets at least to the playoffs and possibly to the divisional round. This team was a quarterback away from making it to the playoffs. They won 7 games with Joe Flacco, Chris Striveler, Zach Wilson, and Mike White at quarterback. And you mean to tell me that you don't think Aaron Rodgers can be better than those guys? Who's been the best quarterback for the New York Jets over the last decade? Who was the quarterback who led the New York Jets to the most success in the early years under Rex Ryan? It was Mark Sanchez. Mark Sanchez probably has been the best quarterback that the Jets have had. You mean to tell me that you don't think Aaron Rodgers can be better than him? For this to not work out, it's going to take more than not having a great offensive line. You can still overcome not having a good offensive line, and Aaron Rodgers is able to do that. He's really good inside the pocket. He can get the ball out fast. He makes great decisions with the football. I don't think the Jets need to have a great offensive line to be a playoff team. Now, they do need a great offensive line if they hope to be a contender for the Super Bowl, but I don't think this offensive line is that bad. People say, oh, Aaron Rodgers was showing frustration in training camp. Who doesn't show frustration in training camp? Bryce Young was upset with Frank Wright a couple of days ago because the play came in too slow. Everybody has frustrations at training camp. It's training camp, man. That's where tempers flare. I'm not really concerned about Aaron Rodgers with the New York Jets. I think that people are trying to milk this thing too much. I think people seem to forget that anytime you have a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, the team galvanizes behind him. The team rallies behind Aaron Rodgers. These young players, they look up to Aaron Rodgers for leadership, for life advice. Aaron Rodgers is a better leader than what most people give him credit for. Sauce Gardner and these young cats just don't, automatically buy into anybody. They got to believe in you. They believe in Aaron Rodgers. You see, with Brett Favre, you didn't really hear the same sentiment. Even though the Brett Favre incident didn't even really go all that bad. They were pretty good to start the first half of the season. Then some injuries came along, and that's where things started to go south. With Aaron Rodgers, though, as long as he stays healthy, I think that this is going to work. If you think that this is going to implode, you're thinking that Aaron Rodgers is going to be Brett Favre 2.0 when he was with the New York Jets, when these are two different situations. The situation that Brett Favre walked into when he first went to the New York Jets is way different compared to the situation that Aaron Rodgers is going into this season with New York. He has a great group of wide receivers. He's going to have a great defense. And his offensive line should be pretty solid. It's having some struggles early on in training camp, but as I mentioned earlier, you don't need to have a great offensive line to make it to the postseason. As long as this offensive line isn't amongst the worst in the NFL, you should be fine. But I don't think this offensive line is completely going to make or break Aaron Rodgers. Like, Aaron Rodgers can overcome having a slightly below average offensive line. And I don't think this offensive line is going to be that bad. What does Aaron Rodgers do great? Get the ball out fast, make great decisions with the football. The Jets can at least be a playoff team. Like, what is your definition of implosion? Like, do you just think that the Jets are just going to be doo-doo? I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's going to happen. Even Brett Favre and the Jets, when he was there, they weren't doo-doo. They were actually a really good team until injuries started to pile up. So I kind of think that people are hoping that this Aaron Rodgers thing doesn't work out because I think they're either a Bills fan, a Dolphins fan, or a Patriots fan, and they're a little bit concerned. I think people feel threatened by Aaron Rodgers. I think people are afraid of what the New York Jets can be if they actually have a great offensive line and Aaron Rodgers is able to bounce back to the player that he was last season or the season prior to last. And even if you call Aaron Rodgers washed up, he's better than anything the Jets have had at QB. And over the last decade, they haven't had a good quarterback since who? Chad Pennington? So I don't think Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets are going to be an implosion waiting to happen. I think this is going to be a playoff team, and I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the AFC. They got a great defense, outstanding defense. And now with Aaron Rodgers at the helm, even if he isn't the Aaron Rodgers of old, he can at least be better than Zach Wilson, whoever else you had at quarterback, and you won 7 games with that. So what's keeping you from winning 9 or 10 this season? I mean, to just say this thing is going to result in a disaster, I think you need to go back and watch how the New York Jets were when they had Brett Favre. It wasn't an implosion. It was actually being pretty successful until injury started to occur. So unless an injury happens to Aaron Rodgers, I don't see how this doesn't work. Conference expansion has been reshaping the college football landscape, and there's been a lot of chaos that's come with conference realignment. I mean, we've seen what has happened to the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is pretty much on the brink of extinction. And with the Pac-12 on this last leg, that's led their last 4 teams to try to seek shelter in another conference to survive. And Cal and Stanford recently were in talks for trying to get into the ACC. Now, apparently, according to Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports, the majority of the ACC programs were on board with Stanford and Cal joining the conference along with SMU football. But apparently there are 4 to 5 other programs who aren't on board with Cal, Stanford, and SMU joining the ACC. And for these 3 teams to gain membership into this conference, they need a 3/4 majority vote, which means they need 12 out of 15 votes to gain membership into this conference. And from a couple of articles that I read, I'm going to pull up a really good one because there's a lot of hypocrisy going on when it comes to this. So, according to this article by the AP, right, they say that ACC keeps Stanford, Cal, in limbo as presidents choose not to vote on Western expansion. So according to Ralph D. Russo, this article was posted at 9:24 a.m. today. He reports that the Atlantic Coast Conference presidents chose not to vote Wednesday night on rather to add Stanford and California to the league, keeping the schools in limbo as they look for an escape from the crumbling Pac-12. 2 people with knowledge of the situation told the Associated Press. The people spoke on condition of inevitability because they neither the ACC nor the schools were speaking publicly about their internal discussions. Both people stopped short of calling the league's exploration of westward expansion did after 3 days of meeting on the subject, but added that it was clear getting the necessary 12 votes to add the North California schools would have been difficult. The ACC conference has also been looking at SMU, the Dallas-based school from the American Athletic Conference, as an expansion target. It also says Cal and Stanford have been searching for a path from the Pac-12 to another Power 5 conference for days, also reaching out to officials with the Big Ten. 2 people with knowledge of that situation said the Big Ten has not so far been moved towards adding 2 more West Coast schools to go along with Southern California, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington, which are set to join in 2024. The 2 people also spoke to the AP on condition of inevitability because the schools talked with the Big Ten were also not disclosed publicly. The ACC has added 15 schools with none farther west than Notre Dame and South Bend, Indiana. The Fighting Irish are football independent but compete in the ACC and most sports. The ACC's westmost football south, or the ACC's westernmost football school is Louisville. The ACC is searching for ways to generate more revenue for its schools while being looked into a media rights contract with ESPN that runs through 2036. The ACC's most recent average distribution per school was under $40 million. Man, get this out of my face, man. I'm trying to read. Fourth among Power 5 conferences in the Southeastern Conference, and the Big Ten are about to make a leap forward as new television deals kick in next year. Now, this is my favorite part of all of this, right? So I want to skip a little bit below. I want to go to where they talk about, where is it? I cannot find it. But ironically, Notre Dame kind of has a lot to say about Stanford getting into the ACC. Now, I'm going to try to find this. Notre Dame, Stanford. Notre Dame really wants Stanford in the ACC, man. Stanford and Notre Dame. Let's see. Notre Dame pushing to get Cal Stanford into the ACC. This is really ironic. Notre Dame is pushing for a team to get into a conference that they're not even an official member of. Every bit of news regarding the future conference homes of Cal and Stanford adds a layer of intrigue to the grand scheme of conference realignment. A Wednesday afternoon news item appeared to be a potential game changer for Cal. Larry Williams of Tiger Illustrated, which covers Clemson sports, reported Tuesday that Notre Dame, a member of the ACC in every sport except football, is pushing hard for Cal and Stanford to be added to the ACC. But ESPN quoted a source on Wednesday evening that said the ACC's discussion hit significant roadblocks. Whether that means Cal's long shot hopes of securing a place in the ACC or did is unclear. Brett Murphy of Action Network tweeted Wednesday that the ACC meeting ended without a vote on expansion by league presidents because there is not enough support. McMurphy says SMU has offered to join the ACC without taking conference revenue for the first few years. Apparently, 2 or 3 ACC schools hold the swing votes, with the others having already decided how they will vote. 12 of the 15 ACC schools, at least 75% most vote yes, in addition of a new member joining. Approval is just a few votes short, and the official vote is unlikely to be taken until 2 or 3 undecided schools make their choices unknown. I'm told Notre Dame, as a full voting member of the ACC, is pushing hard for the additions of Stanford and Cal. That full voting member part is ... something writing on this shortly. Now, I don't get why Notre Dame, right? And they even say this, any conference would do nearly anything to bring in a Notre Dame football program. And if the Irish decided it would join the ACC as a football member, if Cal and Stanford were added, the ACC presumably would invite the Bay Area schools immediately. Now, I'm trying to find where the Notre Dame AD had mentioned something about how, it's kind of a little bit crazy that these great academic institutions aren't able to get entrance into the ACC conference. And I'm trying to figure out where this was, man. Like, I cannot find it. But allegedly, the AD of Notre Dame feels like since Stanford and Cal are such great academic institutions that they deserve the right to be in the Power 5 conference because how good they are academically. But here's the thing with that. Guess what? In college football, nobody gives a damn about your academics, fam. They care about the revenue that you're going to bring. And if you're Florida State or Clemson, you're asking, how does adding Stanford and Cal and SMU bring anything more to this conference? How does this benefit us? And you see, with the ACC, I don't know why they allow Notre Dame to toy with them the way they did. Like, just force Notre Dame to join the damn conference. Tell Notre Dame, if we add Stanford and Cal, you got to join as an official football member. Try to solidify Notre Dame in this thing. Don't allow Notre Dame to run this thing behind the scenes. They're not an official member of your conference, so therefore, I don't get why they have so much pull. Let's be honest. If the ACC was to collapse today, Notre Dame will probably find another conference willing to partner with them. You see how this is a one-sided relationship? Notre Dame is just allowed to kind of pull strings and make demands where they're not even an official member of the table. Why do they get an official vote if they're not an official member of the conference in every single sport? You can't just be a member of the ACC in wrestling and tennis and golf and basketball and not an official member in football. That makes no sense. You got to force Notre Dame to officially join the conference. You cannot allow Notre Dame to have all this pull. Notre Dame, I don't think, has the right to be making demands that, oh yeah, like, you got to go get Cal and Stanford. Like, bruh, Cal and Stanford bring nothing to the ACC in terms of revenue. Yes, they do bring a lot of, great things from when it comes to an academic standpoint, but nobody's really, doing conference expansion or conference realignment to, bring better academic standing institutions to their conferences. Like, they're trying to bring schools that are going to generate a big amount of revenue to the conference, schools that are going to draw viewership. Stanford and Cal don't draw any viewership. How many Cal and Stanford fans even exist in this world? I know it doesn't have to be too many. Stanford has been down in football for the last couple of years. And Cal, I don't think they've been good in football in a brick. So I'm looking at the ACC. It's really puzzling to me that they are allowing Notre Dame to kind of have this much pull. And it says that Cal, Stanford to the ACC looks unlikely at this time. Remember where we were a week ago at this moment. Conclusion, stay tuned. Notre Dame, an ACC member in all sports, but football is pushing hard for the ACC to ask Stanford and Cal, like, why is Notre Dame allowed to have this much pull? They're not even an official member of the conference. Like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. I am told Notre Dame, like, they keep saying that Notre Dame is pushing hard to add Cal and Stanford, but it's like they don't really bring anything to the conference. Like, how is adding Stanford and Cal going to benefit the ACC? Does Stanford and Cal make the ACC better than what it already is? No. And how is this going to entice Clemson and FSU to want to stay? All you're doing is continuing to split up the amount of revenue between those schools by adding schools like Stanford and Cal. FSU and Clemson, I don't think are going to be willing to want to split revenue with Stanford and Cal. The problem that FSU has with the ACC is that there are teams like UCF that are making more than them. And they are blue blood teams or blue blood schools in college football. There are schools that should be getting paid way more than what they're receiving. There's no reason why UCF and Colorado should be getting more money from television deals than Clemson and FSU. And that's why FSU is a little upset. And if it wasn't for the grant of rights, that's the only thing really keeping Clemson and FSU from being able to leave the ACC. So you look at this situation, I don't get why the ACC is allowing Notre Dame to have so much pull in this. Like, bruh, why does Notre Dame get the opportunity to have a vote on this? If you're not an official member of our conference for every single sport, I wouldn't give you any vote. You're not an official member. This is a family-only operation. We can't allow outsiders to have a really strong say in how we run our conference, and it kind of shows you how the ACC actually is ran and why the ACC is in the current state that it's in right now, because you're allowing a team that's not an official member of your conference in football, the sport that draws the most revenue out of all collegiate athletic sports, and yet they're not an official member of your conference. You're allowing them to pull strings and kind of use a little bit of influence because they're Notre Dame when they don't really bring anything to your conference at this moment outside of the fact that, their ratings draws and whatnot. But until Notre Dame is an official member of the ACC, why should they allow them to have a say in who gets access to this conference or not? Cal and Stanford don't move the needle for the ACC. If anything, it just kind of irritates Clemson and FSU even more and give them more ammunition to want to leave. If you're going to go out there and add somebody, add a school that can bring something to this conference, a school that can elevate this conference. At least Oregon State and Washington would be much better than Stanford and Cal. I mean, Stanford and Cal should be in a Power 5 conference because they're great academic institutions. Come on. No, that's not how this works. Like, I know it sounds a little bit messed up, but at the end of the day, it's about revenue. It's about ratings. It's about money. And Cal and Stanford don't really bring any to the ACC. Nobody is jumping out of their seat to see Cal and Stanford play anybody. As a matter of fact, you see Cal and Stanford on your TV, you're finding another game that's more exciting to watch. SMU, though, I do think will be a really interesting addition for the ACC because SMU is a team that has a lot of potential to be really good. They already have their NIL collective together, and they are a team on the rise. Have you not seen what SMU has done in the transfer portal and recruiting over the last couple of years? They brought in some pretty good recruiting classes, and they brought in some really good portal classes as well. I think they have a top 15 transfer portal class going into this season at the moment. So SMU, I do think it would be a really good addition to the ACC. They're in Texas. Texas schools have a lot of money, and I do think that SMU does have a pretty solid following. So, if anything, I would accept SMU before I accept Stanford or Cal. They don't bring anything, at least with SMU. They're on the up and up, and they do have a lot of potential in football. I just think that they need to be in a bigger conference, and the fact that they are wanting to join your conference without really getting a big share of the revenue really early, you should kind of have a little bit more incentive to want to add them. So this is the latest going on with the ACC's potential expansion, which kind of doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. We can look at some more news. I'm trying to find a report that was trying to say that Notre Dame was trying to get them into the ACC, man. Like, it was something else behind this. I'm trying to find it. Here it goes. I found it. So, in this article by SI Sports Illustrated, 4 to 5 ACC programs against Stanford, Cal, SMU expansion plan per report. During a meeting Wednesday night, it became clear that the programs within the ACC are not on the same page regarding a possible expansion that could include Stanford, Cal, and SMU, according to Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports. Last week, the conference was considering an expansion plan that included Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, Stanford, and Cal. Arizona, ASU, and Utah joined the Big 12 last week after Oregon and Washington committed to the Big 10, leaving the Pac-12 in ruin. SMU, meanwhile, is a member of the American Athletic Conference. The majority of the ACC is in favor of this expansion, but 4 to 5 of the 15 members are pushing back against the move, per the report. In order for the expansion to go through, the conference needs 3/4 majority, 12 votes of the 15 members to approve any move. Notre Dame receives a vote because it's a partial conference member in football and a full member in all other sports. The Fighting Irish are in favor of the move. Notre Dame's athletic director, Jack Swarbrick, told ESPN's Heather Dinich that the reason they advocated for Cal and Stanford was because the notion that 2 of the very best academic institutions in the world who also play D1 sports could be abandoned, and this latest chapter of realignment is an indictment of college athletics. I don't really see how it's an indictment of college athletics when you don't bring anything to the table for real. Football is the most revenue. Well, college football brings in the most revenue. Stanford and Cal, I'm pretty sure they got some pretty good athletic programs, but nobody really cares about Olympic sports. You want to know why? Because they don't bring in a lot of revenue. Cal and Stanford aren't going to bring any ratings or revenue to the ACC. So why would any team or any school like Florida State, Clemson be in favor of adding them? You feel me? It's just 2 more teams that you got to split the pie with. And if you're FSU and Clemson, it's like you respect, what those schools do academically, and you respect them as high prestigious academic institutions, but are they prestigious football programs? No. Like ESPN and FS1 aren't going to be cutting $1 billion television media rights deal because Stanford and Cal are great academic institutions. Being a great academic institution doesn't get you nowhere in college football. Look at Harvard. They're a great academic institution, and they're playing in FCS, in the Ivy League. Why can't Stanford just go to the Ivy League? Why can't Cal go to the Ivy League? It's still D1. It's just subdivision, Division 1. It's like Notre Dame pushing for Cal and Stanford to be in the conference really confuses me, because Notre Dame isn't even an official member of the ACC when it comes to football. So why is what Notre Dame has to say being taken into such a large consideration by the ACC? Like, the other schools who are against this, they see through the bull crap. Like, I would be extremely annoyed if I was Florida State right now and I had to deal with Notre Dame trying to push for Cal and Stanford to get into the ACC, man. Like, push for somebody better to get into the ACC. I'd rather accept SMU before I take Cal and Stanford. They got potential. Try to lure another team from another conference. Try to find some better G5 schools to bring up to the ranks, and there aren't really any left. Maybe Boise State. But I mean, other than them, I mean, who else are you going to get that's dramatically going to increase the value of the whole entire ACC? So this whole expansion chaos for the ACC, man, it's really, really interesting to see how this is going to turn out. But adding SMU, Cal, and Stanford, I don't really think brings anything of value to your conference in terms of football. And even in basketball, like Stanford and Cal, I don't really think they're good in basketball neither. SMU, like I said, like, they got the potential to be a really good program in the ACC. They may not be a national contender, but they could at least be an 8-9 win program. Like, I would add SMU because they are in that Texas market, and they do bring in a good amount of revenue, dealing with the fact that they are in the state of Texas, and Texas schools are revenue generators. But outside of SMU, like, why would the ACC want to bring in Cal and Stanford? They bring nothing to this conference from an athletic standpoint. Yeah, they bring in fantastic academics, bro, but nobody cares about academics when it comes to conference realignment. People are trying to find the programs that bring in the great ratings, that are going to bring in a lot of revenue. And I know it's a little bit harsh to say, but it's just the truth. And I think that, you know, the Notre Dame athletic director who's trying to push for Notre Dame to be into the conference, man, like, I think he's being a little bit delusional about this. Just because they're great academic institutions doesn't mean they have the right to be in a conference that's bringing in a lot of revenue from a television deal. Like, if you're garbage in football, what are you bringing to the conference? How are you making the conference better? All of the moves have been made in conference realignment up to this point have been about money. And Stanford and Cal, guess what? They don't bring enough of it. Let me know how you guys feel about this down in the comment section down below. Do you think it would be a good idea for the ACC to add Cal, Stanford, and SMU to the conference? Does it save the ACC? Does it make the ACC look more appealing with those teams in the conference than it does without it? This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I'm looking forward to watching CJ Stroud make his preseason debut in a couple of minutes. So this was a pretty short episode, but I will see you guys tomorrow with another episode. If you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. We go live every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Leave us with a 5-star review, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another episode.